around our topic. Today we want to talk about something that is kind of the natural continuation of our previous episodes. So several weeks ago, we established some of the scientific groundwork for why we have evidence that the climate is changing. And a couple weeks ago, we looked at how that's impacting weather here in South Florida and sea level rise. And this week, we're really looking at how this impacts people and what people are, how these organizations are helping people be more resilient, and while also addressing the ideas of equity and talking about the justice factor. That's a big part of the conversation. We start getting into how these kind of scientific and weather-related issues translate to real people's lives. So Daren's here with us, and I'm going to introduce our panelists today. We have Caitlin Fogarty with us here from Orlando Permaculture. And Kalyn has actually been a long-time friend of mine and of Elliot's, but she works in regenerative landscaping. She does consultations about how individuals can get involved with permaculture, and she helps organize communities in the Orlando area to be more resilient and to learn about self-reliance and to help be aware of our relationship with the environment. I think that's fair to say. Someone that I'm just meeting today that I'm very excited to hear from is Miss Mayra Cruz. She works with the climate resilience. She's the climate resilience program manager at Catalyst Miami, and she manages CLEAR, which is the community leadership on the environment, advocacy, and resilience, and HEAL, which is the housing equity advocacy and leadership part of that organization. They provide trainings around social justice, community organizing, around issues of climate change and affordable housing, respectively. And so someone that's very active in the Miami community around climate justice. Our third panelist today is somebody who I've had the personal pleasure of working with some projects before in the past with, Ms. Barbara Martinez-Guerrero, who grew up in South Florida. She's very involved with an organization that I got to work with, Dreamin Green. She's the executive director, and she helps lead the organization, expanding its programs in the region to help connect kids in schools with these ideas around climate change. She's actually a returned Peace Corps volunteer, which is something I always wanted to do. And she's spent years teaching English as a second language in Eastern Europe. So she has a very, very varied background here. And she's here to speak to us today about, and help empower, especially youth, to lead the response to climate change and other environmental challenges facing South Florida. So that's the most people I've ever introduced in one time, so I hope I did an okay job. The main thing is I'm very thankful for you all joining us today to really bring clarity to this complicated human issue that we're going to talk about today. So the format of this, how this will go, is we have some guiding questions that we want to open up to the panelists. But before we do that, I just wanted to give Daren a chance to say hello and you know, let him speak to this topic a little bit. You know, it's something new that we're kind of bringing to the table this week for the first time, is this idea of resiliency and climate justice. So first of all, I haven't gotten to say hi to you today yet, Daren. How are you? Welcome to the show. And do you care to say a few words before we jump into the meat of the subjects here?
Would love to. Thanks so much for the introduction, Dane. Thank you for being our moderator, and thank you for our lovely panelists for giving us their precious time. This is cool time for us to kind of check in on what we're doing, why we're doing, and putting it all in perspective. It's amazing to me how much everything is connected. Everything is connected in terms of doing renewable energy, is connected to keeping our sea level rise under control, is connected to all of the social things that we're doing in terms of equitable work and fair priced housing. It's all connected. You know, Miami is a very transient city, and cities are known that when the people that live in that city stay there and live there for a long time, they take ownership of the destiny of their city. And so how do people stay in a city? Well, they own their homes. So, you know, we want to move towards that model of people being able to afford their own housing. So everything's connected. So we're just thrilled to have everybody here today.
Cool. And with that said, I want to turn it over to the panelists to let them speak for themselves about the work that they do, And I would love to hear something that comes up for you as a success story that can really help the people watching connect to the value of your work. If there's any particular case study that you're proud of. Myra, would you like to start us off here?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Thank you for having me be a part of this. It's really cool that you guys are doing this, especially as like a solar company that, is definitely like well known in this region. It's pretty cool that you guys are connecting the dots this way. So I appreciate that a lot. So yeah, as mentioned, I work at Catalyst Miami. I'll just give like a quick backdrop because we're kind of an odd organization in the sense that, we are a nonprofit. We've been around for quite some time now, for more than 20 years, but we are a direct services organization primarily aiming to improve the health and wealth of low to middle wealth communities and families. So we provide financial services, we provide healthcare access work, and then we also do policy and engagement work, which is where I fit into all of that. So as mentioned in like my bio, I'm really proud of the two programs that we offer for free for community members. One is called CLEAR, which is focused on climate resilience, and the other is called HEAL, which is around affordable housing. And both of those topics in themselves are very much, interrelated in terms of the impacts that climate change is having on our housing infrastructure here and how it works. But yeah, both programs are great. I mean, they provide a really exciting way for community members to get involved and to learn about these issues in a deeper way. And we really also try to make it a very welcoming space. It can be kind of intimidating to learn about these topics. We talk about clean energy, for example. We should talk about having you on there to talk about that. It'd be really cool. But yeah, we just really break down the issues, like how does it impact you? What is the greenhouse gas effect? Like, let's get down to like the nitty gritty about these topics. So something I'm really proud of, especially when it comes to these two programs, is that we really do see an increase in civic engagement once people know and feel comfortable around these topics and issues and can connect the dots. They're much more likely to go in front of like a city or county commission meeting and talk about these issues and advocate for policies and programs that they really care about, that they believe in, or to push back if they don't see that happening in these spaces. And oftentimes for anyone, those can be very intimidating to step into. So I think, especially with everything that's been happening around police brutality, for example, there was a very well attended public safety meeting, and I heard a lot of familiar voices, and I was just really proud of them. I'm happy when they step into those spaces and really use the knowledge that they've gained to shape things and to make things better for their own communities. So that's just a little tidbit of the work that I get to do every day.
Very cool. Thank you. Kalyn, would you like to jump in next?
Sure. So I'm a pretty hardcore plant nerd. That's a bit of my background, is in more of organic farming and regenerative farming. But over the last few years, I've been helping co-direct Orlando Permaculture, which is more about community resiliency. And I really like to think of it that we've gone through this stage of succession where, we basically kind of were starting with a social landscape that was pretty barren, not very connected. There wasn't a lot of, if you will, like soil social life. And we're just getting to the point where I feel like we have all of the right players. We've regenerated all the different layers of the forest. We have, metaphorically, all of the niche fillers and things like that to really start creating social change. And I'm really happy this year to be partnering with and launching some programs that are going to move beyond just planting gardens and food forests and start to actually get into how do we regenerate social culture and economic systems. And so there's some cool programs around time banking and micro loans and this type of stuff that we'll be launching soon as pilot programs and, working our way through those. And that's super exciting. So that's my story.
Great. Does anything come up for you as an example of someone who has worked with OP that you feel like really shows, OP's value for the community in that lens?
You mean that they're very valuable?
Well, just that the OP has meant a lot for them, that it's shown that, some of the impacts that OP has had in Orlando.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of local sort of regenerative businesses that have been almost launched, not completely because of OP, but that's sort of been the social ground for those things happening and helping be a part of that. So that's very exciting. Just being a place where we can, recreate some of the social web of villages or towns of the past, because, a lot of places we don't have gathering spaces. We just have streets with cars. So yeah, I think that's the really positive part so far.
Yeah, I can think of a compost business and a ferments business and several examples of people who, whether it started at OP or not, was definitely incubated by the community that gathers there. Plus really great potluck meals there. Ms. Barbara, would you like to share some stories and some background from your work?
Sure, I'd be glad to. First of all, thank you guys for having me on. I'm really honored, and I love being around people that are doing this kind of work, and that's actually one of the things that I'm most proud of, but which is bringing, the ability of bringing people together and this community that is thriving here in Miami. We're seeing a lot of organizations taking the work of tackling environmental issues, climate change on, and it's really inspiring to see because, Dreamin Green has been doing this work for about 14 years. So we're just finished our 14th year of programming. We're about to start our 15th. And so when we first started, the organization focused on looking at water and energy consumption in schools. And it started with a pilot program with only 3 schools, and going in and having them do water and energy audits and taking a look at that kind of data, working with Miami-Dade County Public Schools to help them do an inventory of where, their water and energy consumption was. And from that, it's built now to a program where we have about 110 schools on average every year that participate, and the program has expanded to include other topics, such as having them look at alternative transportation. Food security is one of the ones that we've integrated the last couple of years, not only looking at gardens in the schools, which there are actually a lot of edible gardens in schools here in Miami-Dade County, because of the fact that we, a lot, especially elementary schools, have a lot of land. And, it's really nice for teachers to, show students how to grow peppers and tomatoes, which definitely we think it's a definite great beginning. And it's great to see how it evolves, because our program not only deals with elementary school, but we've also have middle and high schools that participate. And so through our Green Schools Challenge program, we've definitely seen in the last 2 years a lot more high schools participating in these kinds of programs. And so one of the things that we're really proud of is the fact that our organization serves as a resource for schools. And so we've been able to partner with a lot of organizations in the last couple of years. And, one of the ones, obviously with Catalyst, I love their CLEAR program. And, we've been able to send our staff and promote that programs. We've been working too with Miami-Dade County Parks department to promote their all of their programming and look at their nature center. We've held events, you know, in the nature center to get students out there and to get the public out there to learn more. Last year we worked with the Ocean Conservancy, and this upcoming year we'll be working with them again. We've also partnered with the Everglades Foundation. So that's one of the things that I have seen, that we have been able to meet and collaborate with all of these wonderful organizations. You know, last year, how I got to work with you, Dane, through Before It's Too Late, through the 7-Day Earth Challenge, which was fabulous. We're seeing a lot of people wanting to do more, and we love that we have a platform and a format to get into schools and to touch the students in a way that they're yearning for. We see it, you know, we see, as Myra mentioned, that there are students that you're seeing now going to commission meetings. You know, the Clio Institute has their Gen Clio program where, you know, they train students how to talk about climate change with their government officials. And so we're seeing all of this, and so that's something that I'm proud of with this organization, that we're able to give that platform, we're able to bring those resources and introduce and work with all these great organizations that are here in this community. So we definitely want that to continue.
Cool. Yeah, I think I appreciate that kind of intro. There are things that I know about all of your work, but there's also stuff that I didn't know. So thanks for the intro, everybody. I think next, I would like to, if we can talk some about setting the scene for what environmental justice really is. You know, working in this space, we may take it for granted, but I remember, you know, I remember trying to wrap my head around, like, the idea is that the environment belongs to all of us, right? And that there are communities that are more at risk, and that there are populations that contribute disproportionately to the problem. And it sounds like all of your organizations try to find ways to include people, to help educate them about ways that maybe that they are at risk, or steps that they can take to help safeguard themselves about risk. Can you talk about that mechanism in our society? And I will just open it up to whoever wants to speak, but the idea that and certainly in our society, and I guess internationally as well, is important to acknowledge that there are people who will be disproportionately affected more than us, and there are those people may have less of a voice in what happens, and that's a moral you know, consideration or obligation. Or would anybody care to kind of set the scene for what inspires you to do the work, if it, you know, if it could give some context to people who may be watching? Not all at once now.
Yeah, I can answer some of that. I guess in terms of what inspires me, I think so originally I come from a public health background, and specifically to me, going back to exactly what you were talking about, to me, it was mind-boggling that there's so much that you can't control in your environment that has such a deep impact on your health, and the fact that there are things that happen that it feels like you don't have a say in. To me, that was just really, it was a lot to wrap my head around, because I think oftentimes when we think about health, we think about like, oh, you just go see a doctor, if you have something, you'll figure it out, like there's medicine if you have asthma or whatever. But then once you start getting deeper into it and you think about environmental justice, for example, and then connecting it back to Miami, I learned about the history of Overtown, for example, and I think that's such a sad, but also remarkable example of how these things end up working out in favor of others, but like also doesn't end up working out for others, where like Overtown used to be a very, you know, it was like a great like middle class neighborhood especially for our Black population here. And there was the expansion of I-95 happening. It was supposed to go up in the Grove, in a wealthier part of the city, more of a white population there. they weren't able to find an overtown, and so now you have that highway that goes right through there. And to me, it's crazy that if you walk through there and you see pictures of what it used to look like before, it just doesn't look the same anymore. And it still hasn't recovered in terms of that impact from putting that there. And then you hear about the higher rates of asthma, which makes sense because of all the cars that are driving through there. And the fact that one of the pillars of the highway goes through the high school there, that just to me is even crazier when we think about the impacts of the fact that you have a school where kids are like running track, doing exercise, and then, they're getting these higher, higher pollution that's coming in and stuff like that. So all of that, just like, that's a very easy way of kind of connecting dots of like, wow, there was like this really big injustice that happened. People weren't able to fight this politically, didn't have the power at that time. And now 50 plus years later, we're still seeing the ramifications of that. So that to me, like that in a nutshell is environmental justice or injustice, however you want to put it. But to me, that's like really what keeps me going is the fact that things like that still happen today. And I think that's why the education that a lot of us do, from what it sounds like on this panel, is so important to let people know that you can fight that. There are ways to combat those things from happening in your own backyard, and that, they're not alone in this fight. They have so many resources like us that can help them through this process.
And I can jump in there to follow up with Myra. I mean, it is really interesting for me. I originally wanted to be and was for 12 years an elementary school teacher. So my main background has been in education. And as Dane mentioned, I got a chance to work in various schools, even overseas when I was in the Peace Corps. And what has really inspired me is the students that I've worked with and their ability to really speak up for themselves when they see a wrong, when they see something is unfair. And they really see things in a way that I feel sometimes is very clear and purposeful. And so I worked also in New York City, in the Lower East Side as a teacher. And that was very interesting to work in a school there where, students came from all backgrounds and all walks of life, and had so many different experiences. But one of the things that really, helped them come together is they all talked about how they like to go outside, how they like to, go to the park, how they, they would walk in various neighborhoods just to be able to go to Central Park just because there was a green space. I look also to here when I worked here as a teacher. I worked in the Grove, at a school in the Grove. And it was very interesting because, again, you would get some students that they love being inside, but had never been to the beach here in Miami, and so that really, I feel like the environment is something that connects us all. Whether it's for recreational purposes because you like to go fishing, or it's just because you like to hang out under a tree at a local park. And I feel like environmental justice is a way to ensure that everybody has the same access to nature and to those environmental resources that we all need. And so we see how everything is connected, and how there is still a lot of inequality when it comes to access to those resources. And Miami is hard because it's so large, it's so spread out, that what happens in North Miami is very different than what happens in Homestead. And so how do you have a uniform policy or plan when everything is so different, and access to different resources is very different. So students that I've met have inspired me to continue the work that I do.
Caitlin, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? I want to make sure we hold some space for your perspective as well.
Sure. I guess in terms of, for me, I had a pretty strange upbringing. I was homeschooled and spent a lot of time in nature, just kind of running around, and was so privileged to have that connection. And it took me really until I was in college to realize that a lot of other people didn't have that same privilege. And that was, pretty upsetting, or just even that I took some environmental justice classes in college, and even just sometimes the way our like mainstream worldview is, you don't realize how often we think of things from kind of like the white space, or we think of things, just from our simply like very narrow experience. And so I've had many, many experiences that I think inspire me, from working and living in a commune in Colorado with some people that worked with indigenous people who were fighting oil drilling and all these other really wealthy corporations. And they're just 100 people out there trying to make a difference, and no one's reporting on them, no one's telling their story, but they've been fighting this for decades. And so I think it's all those little stories that I know are out there, of all these small groups of people that are continually fighting for climate justice and environmental justice. It makes me want to like get up and go and get some stuff happening.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a sense of purpose that comes from realizing all those things. About the historical perspective, obviously there are a lot of examples of current events, especially in Florida, that relate to climate justice. But when we look at, how do you feel like that relates to the historical perspective of the overall environmental justice movement? Would anyone like to speak to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think of it in this way, that the environmental justice movement is funded and is known about in a fraction, with money and exposure, as the regular environmental movement. So there's been studies and things I've read that have shown, the environmental justice organizations receive something like 5% of the funding that other mainstream environmental organizations receive. And I think this is a telltale sign that some of our origins of the environmental movement were based in, the ideas of certain races being superior to other races. So whites were superior to other people. There was a lot of originators of the environmental movement that were pro-eugenics, wrote books, and even helped create immigration policy in the early 20th century in the United States, that I think a lot of times in the environmental movement, because we think of ourselves as very liberal and we're very socially liberal, we don't like to potentially think about, are any of those things still, having effect on our current movement? And I think they are, just based on the lack of large organizations, the lack of diversity that they have in their leaders, the lack of other, household names in the environmental movement tend to usually be white people or white males. And I still think there's also this kind of cultural narrative that we have around environmentalism that mostly dictates it's white people who really care about the environment, or it's white people that really care about climate change. when there's been study after study, and there's all these groups doing amazing work that are, Black or brown people or Native Americans who, when you poll them, they actually care more because they're more likely to be in a part of the city that's actually being affected right now by these issues. And so I think, it's kind of like, in order to move forward, we need to make sure we understand kind of like what baggage do we still have from the origins of this movement, and how do we unpack and move forward in a more socially just way.
Well, and I mean, I think to jump in, I think that the environmental justice movement, a lot of people don't make that connection, don't understand what exactly it is when we talk about environmental justice, because there's so many issues, that I think are piled on when we talk about how in certain communities, especially low-income communities, they're more likely to have maybe a landfill or, some kind of factory, because it's more industrial, as opposed to, you go out to a suburb and what you see are trees, and it's, I think, a little bit harder for people to grasp, because there are other issues, that come to the forefront that I think have been more pressing, when we talk about homelessness, or we talk about housing, we talk about low graduation rates, we talk about there's so many other issues that I think it's hard for people to see, and kind of put it at a lower importance. There are other things that need to get done beforehand. And again, it's all about connectivity, example, food security. There are a lot of neighborhoods that are considered food deserts. And usually food deserts tend to be in zones where there are, there's low income communities. And so, that means that they don't have access to fresh produce. And, what do they have access to? Fast foods, I'm not going to name, or gas stations, and, what's cheaper, a fresh tomato, or a can of tomato that's been processed. And so if they're going to feed their family, because they're on a budget, that is more pressing than looking at organic or local, or and that's just a really small example of where a lot of people's heads are at, rather than looking at like, we should be buying local produce, because not only does it help our economy, but it's healthier for us. And so there is still a very big disconnect, and that's, I think, what holds back the environmental justice movement.
Yeah, and I agree that, can you talk some more? I mean, because what you just touched on there is the connection between environmental justice or environmental education and public health. And I think that's a really poignant example of talking about like food supply and the investment that people make into themselves or their kids, with the access they have to foods, but additionally, like, I think there are probably a whole array of different ways that environmental things have an impact on people's health. Are there any of those that you see through your work? If anything comes up for them that really resonate with you as far as how environmental education connects to public health?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. It's literally what I went to school for. Yeah, I'm really grateful that there are more programs popping up now that do connect those dots within like the public health movement. I mean, there's always been environmental health sciences, but I think for the longest time, it was still really focused on like toxins, for example, and like looking at very specific chemicals and stuff like that. And then now over time, I'm seeing more like climate and health programs where you talk about climate change and the many impacts it has on health. So even there, like public health, it took some time for it to catch up. And I think there's still a lot that needs to be done there in terms of making sure that public health professionals understand that this existential threat does threaten people's health every single day, and they see the impacts. They might just not know that that's the cause. But something that like gets brought up a lot of times, especially with the clients and the leadership program graduates that we have, extreme heat is almost always like one of the top 2 or 3 concerns that we can connect back to climate change. I mean, I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think partly, you know, we tend to not work necessarily with the communities that live on the coast, where there you might hear more about like sea level rise or flooding, and like there might be some health impacts from that specifically. If there's like contamination with the water or anything like that. But the families that we tend to work with, they're further inland. They might live in areas that have less like tree canopy. They might have less shade, or you can look at the bus stops and you can readily tell, you know, which ones have coverage and which ones don't. And even then it's like very minimal, not enough to really keep someone cool for the 20 or 30 minutes they're waiting for transit, which happens a lot here because our transit is not great and not reliable. So that's like another issue there that contributes to all of this. If we don't have great transit, people are in their cars, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, extreme heat, that's something that we hear a lot of concern about, and especially with the fact that it's getting hotter, you know, people do notice that their bills are going up in the summer. Connects back to why like clean energy is so necessary, and like weatherization and energy efficiency, like why those types of programs really matter. Because if we can bring people's costs down, it helps them a lot in order to be able to afford AC, which in terms of health, you know, if you have pre-existing conditions on certain medications, if you're older, if you have a baby, there's just so many people that it can impact disproportionately. And we've seen really terrible heat waves, you know, kill thousands of people. It's the leading cause in terms of mortality for climate change impacts. A lot of people also don't know that. So yeah, and I think there's a lot of work to do there, and a lot of like bias to undo too. I think people think, oh, you're from Miami, you can handle the heat. Well, if you can't afford an AC unit, then that changes the equation completely. So I think that's a really great example of that public health and environmental and climate change impact, and ties into environmental justice. Why do certain communities have more green space than others? Why do some have better housing infrastructure than others that have better weatherization in place? Like there's so much that you can dig into just with this one particular problem here.
I just unmuted my mic. One of the things that's interesting, and we've seen this with COVID-19, is that minorities were disproportionately affected, and it's very sad, and it's you know, just completely a leading indicator at you know, the injustice in the world, and all the systems, all the things we have to fix at the systemic level. And you know, there's so many reasons for that. The interesting thing about climate change as it pertains to South Florida is, you know, traditionally coastal neighborhoods are more affluent because people pay more money to live on the water, and that's where the high rises are, and that's where, you know, people pay big bucks per square foot of housing. And so, you know, while in some sort of aspects, minorities are disproportionately affected and disenfranchised, you know, in this case, just by nature of historically, traditionally living on the water being a desirable thing, actually, those are the places that are going to feel sea level rise immediately first. But I'm wondering if, despite that, minorities will still be disproportionately affected, because maybe those places that are actually on the water have huge budgets to invest in pumps and raising roads and other communities, like Overtown, like Liberty City, that maybe aren't on the water, but maybe don't have the kind of tax budgets, the kind of bond budgets to take mitigating actions as we start to experience more direct effects of climate change. So I'm wondering if anybody has any insight into that idea, the fact that despite of the fact that the areas that are on the water that are the most affected by sea level rise are historically more affluent, if minorities that are not in those places will still end up getting the bad end of that.
Yeah, certainly we talk about climate gentrification and Little Haiti being the fastest gentrifying area in the country. So even indirectly through real estate developers and investors wanting to invest in higher elevation areas, that's something that we're seeing. Kalyn, do you have anything to add to that thought process about public health and education around environmental aspects or sea level rise?
Yeah, I also just wanted to comment on what Daren was saying, and then I think this is such a big idea. It's really hard to, for a lot of us to take it in. But when it comes to the climate justice or the climate change movement, there's a certain level of worldwide stability that we have to achieve in order for any community to be stable. So we can't, have some people over here doing a lot of good stuff, but this other, really developed country not paying attention and cutting down their, tropical forests, and it would be okay. So I think that's a big part of it that we need to recognize, but it's also, in a way, it's really hopeful because it means we're all in this together. We all really got to help each other, and if we do, it's going to be really great, and we'll have a really lush, awesome future. And if we don't, those people who live on the coast who have a lot of money, they're probably going to be able to go buy bunkers in Ohio or wherever, and things are going to be a little nutty for them, but they're still going to have like basic food and shelter and all that in maybe 100 or 200 years from now. But some other people, might completely die out, like whole countries. If they start having to migrate and things, there might be a war, another World War III, or all kinds of things that come with lack of stability. And I think that's also a big part of this, like, public education is there's so many different levels, and you don't want to scare people, but you also want to make sure that people understand the totality of what we're talking about. Because if people, if everyone just like starts recycling and composting, that's amazing, but it's not enough. It's not on the right scale of what needs to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to just share a screen here of something you were talking about. This is where we'll see climate migrants coming from by 2100, with 6 feet of sea level rise. And obviously, like you were saying, this would be really tough for people who have to migrate. But at this scale, this will have an impact on, certainly the rest of Florida. Like it's very easy to imagine 2 million people leaving Miami-Dade County as having a really significant impact on, obviously all of Florida. So we're very much connected in this together, I would say. You can see 1.5 million from Broward. Obviously, some of these areas are not in Florida, but are still on the eastern seaboard. So, yeah, Myra, is there anything that you would like to add to that before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what Daren was asking about. I think that's exactly what we're seeing. I think, yeah, like the wealthier people, if they want to move, they can, but those that have, and I think the other thing too is that when we think about who is in transient, it is those historically black and brown communities that have been here for a really long time. So those that are transient might be the ones that live on those really nice, like high rises by the water. But those communities have been here for a really long time. I can't imagine what it means for them to try to move and uproot themselves completely to try to find somewhere more stable to live. So yeah, I think, and I think that's part of the reason too why, at least for us, we do talk about sea level rise as one of the impacts, but we always try to bring it back to like extreme heat. We try to bring it back to like septic tanks we haven't talked about yet here, but homeowners that will be impacted by that and don't have the budgeting and the funding to be able to, you know, to get back onto the main water line. That's a huge issue too. And those that are wealthier can make that change, but those that aren't are left with, you know, that really unfortunate mess that comes from them being on septic. So yeah.
Barbara, would you care to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, income inequality is a big problem when we talk about how people are going to be affected by the changing climate. You know, a lot of people here don't own their homes. There's a lot of renters. You know, in the Black and Brown community, there's not a lot of home ownership. And so they are the ones that, you know, a flood happens and, you know, a hurricane hits and the owners, the landlords can decide to, you know, not reopen or sell their property. And where do those families go, you know? And so the idea that, you know, everything is connected, that there are going to be these changes that are going to affect us all, and you know, our resources are going to be affected by our climate, really needs to be highlighted. And I think that through education at the schools, you know, again, I'm really inspired when I talk to students about how much they know. You know, our students are really leading in the movement right now, because they are seeing that there are a lot of inequalities that we need to talk about. You know, so you know, we're seeing you know, when Myra is talking about how some communities don't have trees, you know, they don't have parks. You could, you know, if you are in an airplane, you can very clearly see which communities are, you know, the more quote unquote affluent communities, and they have these beautiful trees and these shades and these parks, and you can tell communities that are completely opposite, and that unfortunately the resources are not proportionally distributed. And you know, I think that we need to have a serious conversation about those resources. So, you know, where our access to water, our access to clean water, and that's something that, you know, here in Miami-Dade we don't have, you know, as compared to other places. You know, when we talk about Flint, you know, Michigan, and in our own country, and we can go overseas to other countries where, you know, access to clean water is a huge problem. I think that this is the stuff that we need to be teaching our students, and we need to teach them that it's not just one effect, but it's kind of like a domino. You know, one thing goes, and we talk about the you know, stronger heat, then, you know, heats up the climate even more. Then we have the glaciers that melt, and then we have sea level rise, and then we have that. We might have some water quality issues because then things are flooding, and we have septic tanks, and then that affects our ability to grow, you know, food in our community. And so again, it's all of that, you know, the domino effect. One thing is affected, all of these other things are affected. so I think that that's what we need to keep pushing our students in environmental education to make those connections, and to continue to have those conversations with their community.
Yeah, one of the big dominoes that comes up for me when you kind of take me through that thought process is we talked about the pumps that are able to be invested in for Miami Beach. You know, some of the areas with more ability to pump out water, and talking about that a lot of that tax base is derived from real estate development and investment in the areas that will be at risk because of sea level rise. And what happens when the tax base is compromised? Does that impact our ability to deal with these issues? Definitely highlights the importance of being proactive, because our ability to deal with these gets harder and harder. But along those lines, what do you see that well, for one, what do you see that people can do, and what do you see that businesses can do to be proactive and to contribute to a more just future as it relates to climate and environment? Would anybody care to speak to that?
Well, I'll start. So I think individual actions are very important, but unless it's done in a huge collective movement, we're not going to see a huge reversal, for example, of our greenhouse gases being reduced. It has to be a very big collective movement, and by starting, I think, obviously, education, but then, focusing on some career tracks that help the environment, especially when, solar is one of them. I think, we should have more students going into renewable energy fields, solar, wind, all of this stuff that, we kind of take for granted, but that I think that if more people were going into those fields, and green jobs are one of the fastest growing careers. And so I think it's tackling that it's going to take more than just individuals doing individual things. It's going to take a broader movement and a whole lifestyle change and a whole mindset change. So we're looking at, our jobs. We're not just looking at, what jobs make money, but, what jobs make money and can help to improve our environmental situation. So that's where I would start.
One of the things that we're really happy about solar is, besides the fact that it does renewable energy in terms of CO2 as a result of kilowatt hour consumed, it helps keep money in our community. So solar power is known as distributed generation. And what's technically meant by that is that the generation of electricity is distributed amongst many rooftops all throughout a city. Whereas traditional power production, whether it's nuclear or coal or gas, is concentrated in one place. But the interesting thing about that is it's distributed power, not only in terms of production of electricity, it's distributed power in terms of economic power. And what's meant by that is that, a large, corporate utilities, they're pretty concentrated, and they tend to be, pretty tight with politicians, and that really kind of just shuts out the general public out of, any economic gains from energy, right? They're just sort of subjects. We're all just customers. But when we do distributed generation, it takes many, many, many people to produce electricity or to install solar systems. And so that creates a lot of jobs. And that doesn't concentrate large amounts of money in the hands of any one massive gargantuan corporation. Like for example, in our world, we're a solar installer. We do our engineering, but there's another company that does manufacturing. And so every time we buy solar panels, we feel good about knowing that some of the money that we gave the solar panel manufacturing company is going to go towards R&D, and they're going to improve the products. or every month where a family didn't have to pay out $200-300 on their power bill because they already bought their solar system. I always like to say, what can you do with that money? Does that mean you can go and shop at a healthier supermarket that maybe costs a little bit more? Can you put some of that money aside for your kids' college? So by saving money, we're creating local jobs, and we're helping families in our local communities have more money to spend on more important things than putting it in the hands of large conglomerates, large corporations. Yeah.
Myra, is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with what Barbara was saying about that individual action needs to be collective. I totally agree with that. And I think that it does tie into like, what can businesses do? I mean, I think we have seen a big shift in that individual action leading to more collective action. And, I think, I know Clio Institute, one of like their mottos is that, you have like the power of your purse, like the fact that where you shop and who you give your money to can have a really big impact on how they do their business. So I think in terms of businesses, I mean, I think there's things like, of course, using, paper bags and those sorts of things. But I think what's even more impactful is when you do see businesses take it a step further and like they divest, or if they, recognize that they can use their money and reinvest it back into communities. I think that's where I would love to see that movement grow that way, where especially larger corporations, the ones that like really are the ones that are leading in terms of emitting pollution, like if they could be more conscientious and work more closely with the communities that they're impacting, it could completely shift things. But I think there has to be such an awareness there about what negative impacts they're having and being willing to have those conversations. And I think it just reminds me to developers we have here, oftentimes they build without talking to communities that they're building these buildings in. So I think recognizing that privilege and like really using it for something positive, that's what I would recommend. But once again, for businesses, it could be like those more individual actions, like being more sustainable yourself, but want to see something more meaningful come out of those movements.
Yeah, great points. Caitlin, is there anything that you would add to that?
Sure. I'm total in agreement with what was all said. I also want to bring up that, maybe in the climate justice movement, the long haul, getting policies changed, creating something like a new Green Deal, all of those things that are really going to positively affect the global climate are going to take quite a bit of time and take a really, mass effort. But I also think there's lots of things that individuals can be doing right now that don't necessarily, bring down the carbon parts per million, but make their community and, their household really more resilient and regenerative, which even from a selfish point of view of wanting to save the climate movement to be really successful, having people in spaces where, they're more resilient is going to really help that. And so, getting more people growing their own food and being more self-reliant and self-sovereign in their energy needs, and teaching people how, maybe a lot of the things that you're spending money on, that, is this a way you want to be spending your time and your energy, or, is this part of kind of this material rat race that, a lot of people have been convinced brings you health and happiness, and we kind of see, that's not so much the case. So it's both planning for the future, but I also think we can, we're here now today, and for the next year or a couple months, how can we make things better right now? And there's a lot of really easy, things that we can replicate, we can do in our communities.
Yeah, off of that topic of like personal involvement and systems change as well, how do you see this as we come into an election season? Is there any important dimensions to it that you see as far as like do you see people voting on this issue? Is this something that we need to encourage people to prioritize with the way that they vote, or a reason to even get out and vote in the first place? How does this tie into coming up into an election season, I guess?
I mean, it's super
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
You can go ahead, Caitlin.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's as the others have been saying, I mean, there's a scale of where, this is actually going to be successful, and that's going to be on a, but maybe national level or even potentially global level. And there are inspiring situations where we've worked globally, for instance, to deal with like the ozone layer depletion, where we actually came together and figured it out, and didn't allow greed and corruption just to continue making that problem worse. So we have examples of doing this and really coming together and saying, humanity's survival and resiliency for the rest of, for however long that can be, like that's important enough. And even, the big elections, Senate elections, presidential elections, they get so much, attention. But even in your local, county, you might have county commissioner meetings, you might have like attorney general meetings. A lot of these meetings get sometimes 0 community members showing up. And so with a very small group of people going and showing up, you can really make sure that those people are representing you and doing what's in the best interest of your community. And today, because of COVID and things, it's almost even easier, because you can actually write in statements to be read into the record. And so you don't even have to go, you can just stay at home and type on your computer. And so, for 10 minutes, you created this potentially really big change. And so I really encourage people to, in their local communities, search out for those things on your, maybe your county website, see what's going on with development or local environmental laws, and, just get 10 of your buddies to go send an email, and you'll be surprised. The commissioners in that, they're gonna be floored that you guys even, showed up and have an opinion about it. So there's a lot of possibility for really good change.
And I just want to piggyback on that. I think that a big issue with our community is that we are not informed and as civically involved. We think that, the politicians are not going to listen. We think that this is the way it's always been, and that, what is my voice going to really mean? Because there's all of these other interests. And I think that's where education, again, is such a big part of where we need to put our efforts to fight that kind of apathy and that lack of interest. And, small elections are just as important as presidential elections. And, looking at voting for judges, voting for school board members, voting for commissioners, for mayors, and the list goes on as we go up. And I have to say that's something that, because we have so many things, again, going to an election to vote, it's kind of like on the bottom of people's like priorities. And I think we need to figure out how to change that, because so much depends on it. And so we see, when there is a movement, that we rally around, one idea. And I think that with environmental justice, I think, yes, everything is important, but maybe, we need to kind of refine our message so it is understood by all, and it's focused, and I guess I think that a lot of the times there's so many things to worry about, we need to kind of like, what is the low hanging fruit, you know? And let's start there so we can make some progress. If the low hanging fruit is to tackle plastic bags, you know, that might be something that we've seen a lot of movement, and we've seen successfully and unsuccessfully how people have tried to ban in communities plastic bags, and encourage people to bring their own bags. But at least it was a rallying cry that it got results because of the fact that it was clear, and it was focused, and that you were very much involved in, who was voting for what and what community was doing what. And I think we need to keep doing that and fight against that apathy, against that feeling like, my vote doesn't matter, because it does, and we've seen it with small things. And I think it's building on that momentum.
Myra, is there anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just very niftily dropped a link right now. But I think part of that is, groups like the Miami Climate Alliance coming together to put these forums together where we can ask, our own questions about affordable housing and immigration and climate change. And I'm sure there will be questions around, pertaining to the Black Lives Matter movement and police brutality and all of that. But I think it is really important that we have those spaces where people can come together to ask those questions of candidates. And yeah, I mean, I think, at least for us here in Miami-Dade, and we have our primary coming up in August, and more than half the seats for the county commission are up. So it's a very unique opportunity to actually flip a lot of those seats, as well as for the mayor, the county mayor. So I think if there was a year for anyone to be super pumped and excited about voting, this really would be the time to do it. And also just throw out that we still have the census going on, and it relates to all of this, everything that we're talking about, and resources. And at least for us here in Miami-Dade, I think we're behind a majority of the counties here in Florida, and even then behind the completion rate for the entire US. So that's another thing that people can be doing, and now you can do it online. Just like Caitlin was saying, you can do this on your phone right now. It'll take like 5 minutes. So that's something else that we're also encouraging people to do, is to, not let not filling this out now impact, the next 10 years in terms of funding. That's such a big thing you can do now that doesn't take too long to do.
Got it. What about each of your organizations? Specifically, if people are inspired by what they hear, what are your needs from viewers or people that could want to contribute to the initiatives that each of you are a part of? Can you talk about that some?
Sure, I can jump in there. So I spoke a little bit at the beginning of our schools program. So our Green Schools Challenge, as I mentioned, we have the lessons for teachers. And so one of the things I'd love to see is more parents getting involved in their school becoming a green school, and encouraging, the principals and administration to take on this, the Green Schools Challenge, and what does that mean? Because I think parents at schools have a lot of say in what is integrated. So that's one thing I would encourage everybody, if they have kids, to see what initiatives their child's school is doing. It doesn't have to be only our program. Obviously, I would love for for us to continue growing, and I'd love to be in all of the schools in Miami-Dade. But there's also other programs as well, and just to be informed, like, I believe the environment is very important, and my son or daughter, what are you guys doing to reduce your waste or use less electricity or things like that. Another is we have an hour-long workshops that we do across the county various times throughout the year. And so we'd love to have more people come to talk, to learn about the water and energy nexus, how are water and energy connected, how they can reduce their utilities bill by being more efficient about the way they use water and energy, how to recycle properly, because there's a lot of confusion as to what we should and shouldn't recycle, and how all of that is connected to climate change. And so one of the things that we do is we try to, at the end of our workshop, to give away toolkits that have different things that they can use in their home as soon as they get home, that'll help to reduce those utility bills, like LED light bulbs and low flow shower heads, and we have some other goodies in there. So I obviously I'd encourage everybody to check out our website and see when those hour-long workshops are coming up so that they can attend. We'd love to get more people to come and learn a little bit more about those programs.
That sounds super cool. That's great.
I have a question for everybody. Everybody's very involved in national level politics, but how can we learn more about local politics? How can we learn more about who our local elected officials are, whether they're commissioners, mayors, judges? People oftentimes don't feel very passionate about voting in local politics because they just don't know who the people are. So from your experience, what insight do you have on how people can get more informed on who the local politicians are and what they're all about?
Myra, you just shared something I just saw about what's the mayoral race that's coming up.
Yeah,
right?
it's a forum. I would say that's a great way, attending any forums. The Miami Foundation here too, they've been there was one mayoral forum, and then they had a county commission, I think it was like District 1, but they put another forum for that. But that's also assuming that you're like looking for those things. I think, looking for, if there's organizations that you're really interested in, at least a lot of the ones that I know that do this kind of work, they do, civic engagement, education, and like, at least for us, we are a C3 nonprofit. We can't like speak on a specific candidate, we can speak on the issues. And for us, when our leadership program participants or graduates, when it's around this time with elections or anything important like the census, we make sure that they're aware that it's in their face, that they get a newsletter as they get in our Facebook, that we send these things through WhatsApp, like just making it as easy as possible for people to know what's happening. So I think like a good first step is just getting connected with groups that already will do the work to get you engaged. I think Venue Florida Majority, especially, they do such great voter outreach campaigns. I think if you get your foot in the door with one of those organizations, oftentimes they'll make sure that you're aware of what's happening, and it makes it just easier for you too. Because we know that people are busy. We know not everyone is scouring the internets at all times trying to figure out what's happening. So I think that's a good way of being plugged in. It's just getting with one of these orgs that are already doing this kind of work. It helps a lot.
How about your organization and how people might be able to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, we have our affordable housing program. I can drop the link. HEAL. We do have applications that just opened up again. We were originally supposed to start before COVID, and then COVID happened. Tried to regroup there. We'll have Clear again, our climate resilience program. We'll have that in the fall. So I know it's a little early, but if you're really, really eager, you can still like submit applications, and we'll let you know when these things are happening. And two, I mean, like if you are inspired to donate, we are still collecting donations. We have this rapid relief fund that we've been doing, a response fund in terms of COVID. Like I said, a lot of the clients that we primarily work with are low, middle income. So we've been getting calls constantly of people who still haven't received like their unemployment benefits, that have lost their jobs, that they've lost income. So if you're, even if it's just like $5, $10, that's another way too to get involved. But yeah, I think our leadership programs are coming up again, and if you feel so inclined to donate, we would definitely appreciate that too. It'll go a long way to help people in need right now.
For sure. Caitlin, anything related to OP?
Sure. I also just wanted to comment on, like how to find out about locally what's going on in local politics, and that I just want to make a plug for, there's a lot of really amazing local leaders and politicians that are really doing their due diligence to make sure that they're being almost political interpreters. So they're creating town halls, or they're creating ways through social media to really make sure that their constituents know what's going on. And I see this as almost a bit of a generational gap, where younger people tend to be more savvy at this, and they're doing that. And so, there's people out there doing this. I think we also really need to encourage them and applaud them for that. And, if we're going to vote in other people next time, we want those people to be doing that same type of kind of feedback loop or setting it up. And so, even if someone is older and has a lot of experience, if they're not willing to kind of be in open communication a lot in these various ways during their term, that seems to be kind of a reason not to vote for them. And so I just wanted to touch base on that. Anna Escamani, FIS, does a really amazing job at making sure that her people she represents know what's going on, what she's doing, how she's working for them, and it's really amazing. In terms of OP, we are in Orlando, so potentially some people watching, or most people watching this, may not be in Orlando. But I would just really encourage anyone to be active. Like, I think it's almost the most limiting factor to any climate justice or environmental movement, is that we need to get more people engaged. We need to have more people, at these meetings, at these action days, and however you see that is relating to you, that's fine. And just bring that passion, bring that, that you're jazzed about whatever, and be a part of your community, because nothing kills apathy more than when organizers put in all this effort and, like 3 people show up. It's just not a fun way to really make community happen. So yeah, get involved.
Great. Yeah. I'm guessing COVID has affected everybody that's here, but how have your organizations adapted to COVID? And, are you planning some programs? Because Kalyn, you were talking about people getting engaged. Like, what does that look like right now? Is it stuff that is planning to happen in the future, or are there ways that people can get involved safely during COVID?
So our OP meetings right now are online. We're hosting them. So that is a way that people can, come on and learn from the community members that we have presenting. I'd also say there's a lot of things, like I'm going to make a plug for the caring community, which is kind of in your guys' area, that I'm working on a microloan program with them. And so it's a microloan program that's meant to not only regenerate the local economy, but also regenerate the local culture and community, in the sense that it's people that are in a situation in life that they got a COVID check and they don't need that money. So they're going to turn around and put it in a microloan program and not get any interest back. They'll be paid back the full sum, but they're not asking for any interest. And so this is kind of a way for people that recognize their privilege, or even recognize maybe, that where they are is because of history, can give back to communities that have been oppressed or, neglected historically. So there's a lot of things like that I think I could leak some other things to the meeting. So there's ways people can donate. There's ways people can join us virtually, and also be inspired to maybe take some of these models and not have to recreate the wheel. Just take it and tweak it a little bit for your own community. But the whole legal and business and all these things that maybe block people from getting into it in the first place because it seems too complicated, we're working out. So we want to be able to hand this off to maybe even all of Florida once we get the kinks worked out.
That's very cool. Yeah. Daren, do you have any input at this point about how Golden is adapting to COVID?
Yeah, so we basically worked from home, pretty much immediately, like in the middle of probably early March, once things started to really heat up.
Early April.
March or April, yeah. And so, all our project managers, anybody that's like an administrative role is working from home. As far as physical construction, we were still, deploying crews and mobilizing and installing, which we were deemed an essential business. And, it's something that we really, we felt sort of a sense of responsibility for us to be able to continue to install solar systems, because for us, it's not only solar systems, it's solar systems and battery backup. So what does that mean for a family? That means that, for the last 3 months, you've gotten into the mantra of shelter at home, keep yourself isolated. Well, what do you do if there's a hurricane? Well, if a grid knocks down a hurricane, you pack up your family in the car and you go to a hotel and you go somewhere else. So to a family that adds, battery backup to their house with solar, that means that they can continue to shelter at home. When we look at, Louisiana having Katrina, a major hurricane event, they took massive huddles of people and huddled everybody together into, sports stadiums, which may be the most effective way to shelter people in a hurricane, but it's also the most effective way to spread viruses. So there's something really scary there. And so if, hotels closed down during the COVID pandemic. So if we can help people continue to shelter at home, then everybody really wins from that. And so, anybody that was administrative, we worked at home. Anybody who was in a field physically installing solar systems, they continued to install solar systems. We saw sales of solar systems slow down, but we saw sales of battery backup ramp up. So a lot of people that already have solar but didn't have battery backup came back, circled back, and they said, all right, now not only do I want to offset my energy needs for renewable energy, I also want to make sure that I have the ability to keep the lights on and stay home if the power goes down. So we've pumped out a lot of solar systems, and it's interesting times. It's we're at a place where there's protests, which is a good thing. We need our voices heard. But those protests can get out of hand, and of course when people gather in huge groups, that's a little bit scary in the midst of a pandemic. So that's kind of our position is shelter at home, stay home. Let's stop the spread of this virus so that we can try to go back to life. And there is never going to be normal as it was. There is only going to be new normal, and that idea of new normal has to span across all of the lessons that we've learned in 2020. In terms of really holding our police accountable to stopping violence and excessive force, moving towards a more equitable and a more just and better equality in our workforce everywhere, and doing everything that we can to prevent pandemics. So 2020 has been a heavy year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it feels malleable right now.
Yeah, so somebody touched on the materialistic rat race earlier. I think it might have been you, Kalyn, and that's something that really resonated with us, because most of our customers finance their solar systems, and so somebody can get solar to offset a certain amount of electricity for cheaper than they buy it, baseline from utilities. So the idea is $0 down. Battery backup, when you add that, you're not really offsetting a different expense, of course, unless you're offsetting the cost of a generator. But we can finance battery backup at about a cost of about $150 a month after a tax credit's applied. So, I'm really hoping that people kind of get this idea of where are people's priorities? Do people need some, fancy sports car to elevate their social status on some kind of materialistic scale? Or does it maybe make sense to drive a normal car that gets the job done, but invest in having the ability to stay at home and through a hurricane and keep everybody, safe and healthy?
Yeah, I agree with what you said, that it's been a crazy year, and it's made me feel, intellectually, I get that climate change is like a crisis, but it feels like the world has been in crisis mode this year, and it makes me feel like, wow, the world is fragile. Like, things can happen. This is the time to act about stuff. Yeah. So, Myra, I don't think we gave you a chance to talk about how people could get involved with Catalyst, or what your needs are as an organization. Did you have any input there?
Yeah, no, I did. I dropped some links in the chat box. And yeah, everything we're doing is virtual at this point. We took a couple of weeks or so, I think, on our finances side. We do taxes for free for families, for example. So there were things
Awesome.
we had to figure out how to do virtually. So it was really awesome that our prosperity team came together to figure that out. So, everything's like encrypted, it's safe, you can do things online. And for our virtual programs too, we have like a worker cooperatives program that's happening now, and they've been virtual. Clear just came back, and now we're virtual, and Heal will be as well. So for us, at least, while the pandemic is happening, we plan to be virtual for now, and have figured out that we can actually do a lot of the same work that we were doing before virtually. It's not the same. Community engagement is tough to do purely online, so that we're still figuring out, but we're glad to be able to continue at least a lot of our services as they were before.
Gotcha. Cool. Daren, did you have any questions for this really cool panel of people we have the opportunity to ask questions to now?
I think we covered a ton of territory. Okay, so what's the one thing, if there could be one thing or top priority that you want to kind of change in your day-to-day behavior or day-to-day outlook, or that you've learned just in light of where the world has been in the last 4 or 5 months?
Barbara, I know that you have to go in just a minute, so maybe you could answer that question on your way out as you have to go.
Sure. Yes, thank you. One of the things that we are working towards is something that Caitlin mentioned before. We have the luxury that we have a little bit of a backyard. So we've learned that we definitely need to grow our own food to supplement some of the things that we get from the supermarket. Through this whole thing, I have 2 kids, and it's really important for me to their nutrition, to make sure that they're growing up healthy. And we all know that nutrition is very important in the development of children. So one of the things I've learned is I need to grow more food. We've tried to grow peppers and tomatoes, but wanted to go a little bit more and looking at some of the things that maybe are not as common, that don't need too much water, or that are not as hard to take care of, that we can grow here from home, not just like a mango tree, or I'm lucky enough to have a tamarind tree, but now we're growing all kinds of other stuff, because I realized that I might need to depend on what grows in our backyard at some point, if we're sheltering at home. So that is definitely one thing I've learned from all of this. I need to get more raised beds for my backyard. And I just want to, because I do have to jump off, but I definitely want to thank you guys for this opportunity, and for being able to listen to what everybody's had to say. It's been really interesting to really hear that there is this group in our community that cares so much about each other, you know, as a community. And that I think we just need to keep supporting and making those connections and sharing what we learned with others. So thank you very much.
Thank you for making time to do this today as well.
Hi, Barbara.
Myra, would you like to touch base, like what Daren was asking there?
So it's basically like what, like my takeaways are from this whole.
If there's one thing you're going to change in your behavior, your outlook in light of the last 3-4 months.
Yeah, I don't know if it's changed my outlook. I think this is the first time I've had to work from home. And I was talking to someone earlier. We were just talking about like, wow, our bank accounts like are definitely feeling happier now that we've been home and not eating out as much and not having to drive around all of Miami-Dade County and, you know, using our cars and stuff like that. So I don't know if that's changed my outlook per se. I guess it's just enlightened me into the fact that work from home does have a lot of like environmental and also just like financial benefits to it that I hadn't thought of before because I had never had the opportunity to do work this way before. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's just interesting thinking about like work cultures too, and just the fact that, you know, it has been a rough few months, and especially for those that are Black and are experiencing the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's been happening, like mental health and all of that. I just think it's just important to take a step back and realize that sometimes like the regular 40-hour schedule or more than that for some of us like doesn't always seem to work. It can't always work with the number of things we have going on. And I don't know, I have like coworkers that have kids, for example, and working from home has been tough for them. I just think, I don't know, it's in some ways it's kind of humanized my colleagues even more, just seeing them having to like tell their kids like, hey, just give me a second. I'm part of this meeting. I need to get this work done. And it's a side of them that I've never seen before. So I think those are just like all little things that I've kind of made note of mentally about like what we're all going through collectively, and just seeing it from a distance just has been really, really interesting and thought-provoking, I guess.
Caitlin, is there anything that you'd care to share?
Yeah, I think this time has made me realize even more how important community resiliency is, especially the space where your community exists within, you know, walking distance or biking distance. So the people that, if there is a hurricane and there's a lot of issues to handle, or you do have to shelter in place, but you have some problem or issue,